Lights Out, Chapter 13. When Mark's alarm clock went off, it seemed like he had just fallen asleep. He'd spent most of the early morning hours laying in bed and thinking about what he and Jim had talked about on guard duty. Maybe staying here wasn't such a bad idea. They didn't have everything they needed, but maybe it could work with what the neighbors had and what they could buy, beg, or borrow. He got out of bed, dressed, and exited as quietly as possible. Jim was already outside and was loading his shotgun into his truck. The early shoppers started arriving at 7:30, and by 7:40 all 20 were present. They climbed into the trucks and headed to town. When they dropped the riders off, the line was longer than Mark had seen it on the two previous times he'd been there. Mark and Jim parked the trucks next to each other, out a ways from the other cars. The two men kept a watchful eye for trouble while they waited. Once the shoppers were done, they headed home. John was sitting in the front seat with Mark for the ride home. "Man, my wife made a list of what we needed, but I was only able to get a little over half of it before I was at my limit," John explained. "I know what you mean," Manny Hernandez said. "My list only had very basic items on it, but I couldn't get to the bottom of it. I hope they get a truck in so we can buy another $50 worth." "Little good it would do me," the man who was standing guard duty with Manny the other day said. "We only have another $13 in cash at home. If the banks don't open, we won't be able to buy any more anyway." "I'm sure we could lend you some cash," Manny offered. "I appreciate that, Manny. Hopefully this will blow over quickly and things will get back to normal," the man replied. "Did y'all see the fight?" John asked. "No, I just heard about it," Manny answered. "What happened?" Mark wanted to know. "Some guy tried to keep putting items in his basket after the clerk told him he was at his limit. The clerk tried to take one of the items out of the basket, and the guy decked him. Then he tried to run out of the store with the basket. He ran toward the front door, but the policeman who was inside stopped him and arrested him," John explained. "How badly did the clerk get hurt?" Mark asked. "It was mostly just his pride, but he'll still have a nice shiner to show for it. Whoever thought you should get combat pay for working at Kroger?" "Hey, John, speaking of combat pay, do you think we should upgrade the security for the neighborhood?" Mark inquired. "I don't know. What did you have in mind?" "I didn't have anything in mind. I was just wondering if we need more guards or something." "I don't understand, Mark. You don't think we need guards we have now, and you're asking me about more?" "I didn't think we needed them, but that was when I thought the power would be back on in a couple days. I believe it's going to be considerably longer now, and I was just thinking we might need more security." "Well, I'll look at it and let you know." On the way home, not far from the subdivision, they passed a small Baptist church with its doors open. Mark noticed several bicycles parked in front and a few people walking down the road toward it as well. Mark looked at his watch. It was almost 10 o'clock. Time for Sunday school, Mark thought. Maybe next week he and his family would go. They were Methodist, but Baptist was close enough. Besides, Jim was Baptist, and they could go together. When they got back to the house, several of the men offered Jim and Mark a can of this or that for taking them to the store. They politely refused. When Mark and Jim walked into the house, a big breakfast was cooking, and everybody was up. Sam was reading a book to the twins, and David was working on a big 500-piece puzzle. The men went into the kitchen and got out the dishes and silverware to set the table. They told their wives about the fight at Kroger. Mark mentioned going to the church down the road, and they agreed that it was a good idea. When they sat down to eat, Mark found that he was as relaxed as he'd been since the burst. He knew they still needed to make a decision, but he was comfortable that they would make the right one. After breakfast, Jim and Mark worked on a map of the ranch to show Gunny. David walked by and pointed out a couple things they missed. Mark thought that a teenager's memory was a strange thing. They could remember the most minor detail of some place they'd been to once, but they couldn't remember they'd been told to clean their room. When they were through with the map, Mark got out his list of the things they would need if they stayed at home. As he reviewed it, he found some things he no longer considered necessities and others that he added. He went down the list and prioritized them. He put the number 1 next to anything they absolutely had to have, 2s next to the items that would be difficult to live without, and anything that would be nice to have received a 3. As he looked at the list, he felt like they could achieve most of the 1s and many of the 2s. The biggest problem he felt they faced was how to pump water if and when there was no fuel for the generator. Hopefully they could sit down this afternoon or tonight and make a master list from their 4 separate lists. Mark's thoughts drifted to other things. He was sitting in his favorite chair in front of the TV. It was Sunday afternoon, and if things were normal, he might be watching a football game right now. The next thing he knew, Jim was shaking his shoulder and telling him to wake up. Jim told him that it was almost 2 o'clock and the second group of shoppers was starting to arrive. Mark asked how long he'd been asleep, and Jim said he'd started snoring about 45 minutes ago. When they got to Kroger, the line was even longer than it had been in the morning. Mark figured that it would take at least 2 hours just to get into the store. The shoppers delivered. Mark and Jim headed for Gunny's. They parked their trucks in Jim's driveway, and Gunny was outside before they could get out. "Hey, Jimbo, I was wondering when you was going to come by and check on your stuff." "Hi, Gunny, how are you doing?" "Except for this damn knee, I'm doing fine. This change in the weather's got it aching like a sumbitch. Say, how are my favorite girls doing?" "They're fine, Gunny, but they sure do miss you." "You're probably just lying, saying that to make me feel good, but damn if it don't." "Listen, Gunny," Jim said, "we didn't come here to check on the house. We came to see you. We need your expertise." "Expertise on what? How to stay regular?" "No, Gunny. We want you to look at the security arrangements at this place we're thinking about moving to." "Okay, let's go inside," Gunny invited. When they went into Gunny's house, Mark noticed that it was very warm inside. Since Gunny had boarded up the windows on the front of the house, there wasn't much air movement. The men sat at the table, and Jim pulled out the map they had drawn. Mark and Jim filled him in on the gate, the fences, and how the guards were deployed. Gunny looked over the map and asked a few questions. "Do the guards check in with someone on a regular basis?" "Not that we saw," Jim answered, as Mark shrugged his shoulders. "Do they have any hidden guard posts or lookouts who can see someone coming from a ways off?" "If they did, they didn't tell us, and at meals I only noticed 4 families each time who didn't have the husband at the table. I don't think there are more than 4 guards during the day and 6 at night." "Do the men in the compound carry their weapons on them?" "Not unless they're carrying concealed," Mark answered this time. "They have all the weapons stored in the armory." "Well, if there's nothing else y'all don't know about, I could take the whole place with about half a troop of drunken Girl Scouts." "How are you going to do that, Gunny? How are you even going to get through that gate?" Mark asked incredulously. "Oh, karate man," Gunny said, faking a bad accent. "Ancient Chinese proverbs say, you no attack a man's strength but where he is weakest." "Okay, I hear what you're saying, and I see how that applies to the gate, but how are you going to take the ranch with just a few attackers?" "I thought the defender's advantage was 3-1. Even if you just count the 25 men at the ranch, you still need 75 to defeat them, right?" "The defender's advantage only applies when the defenders are dug in and expecting an attack. That is how I would do it. This is how I would do it. I wouldn't try to crash that gate. It sounds pretty bulletproof. I reckon I'd cut a hole in the fence before daylight and then sneak up behind the guards at the gate. I'd wait until the shift change at 0600 and take all 4 out at one time. Since the compound is about a mile away, they shouldn't be able to hear the shots. The rovers won't hear it over those fancy 4-wheelers they ride. Then I'd move back to where I came through the fence and set up on the rovers before they found the hole I made and take them out the same way as the other 4. After that, I would march me and my Girl Scouts into the compound after daybreak when the night guards are off duty. Secure the armory, and all they got left to shoot at you is the finger." "Damn," Mark said. "I had no idea it would be that easy." "Well, we do have inside info, and that helps a lot. A random attack without any intel might or mightn't work. That gate and fence would probably intimidate most civilians, but it presents almost as many problems as it solves. There's just too much of it to watch to catch a halfway motivated and organized force before they breach it. They need to put a standing guard of at least 5 or 6 men in the compound 24/7, and they need a lookout who can see the shit hit before it hits the fan and set off an early warning system. It would be best to have some foxholes just inside the compound fence here, and here," Gunny said as he pointed at the map. "And I would teach the women to shoot. 25 men ain't a lot. Plus, they should all at least wear a pistol when they're not on guard duty and keep rifles in their cabins. I could probably suggest some other stuff if and I saw the place, but just those things would make it a lot more secure." "Thanks, Gunny," Mark said. "Say, would you be willing to come out to my neighborhood and tell us what you think we could do to secure our places?" "Sure thing, Karate Man. That's the least I can do for you fixing my truck." "When do you want me to come?" "Day after tomorrow, about lunchtime." "I can come pick you up." "Nah, just drop me another map. I'll drive myself." "Okay, Gunny. By the way, how are you set for groceries?" "Don't worry about that, Karate Man. I got lots. Plus, I went to the store yesterday and bought some more." "Thanks for your help, Gunny. We'll see you on Tuesday," Mark said. "Yes, thanks, Gunny. The girls will be excited to see you," said Jim as he and Mark went out the door. The two friends checked Jim's house quickly and then headed back to Kroger. The shoppers were waiting by the front of the store. They all loaded up and headed home. When they got back to Mark's house, it was a little after 5, and dinner was ready. They ate and then listened to the president. He had nothing different to say than yesterday. They headed down to John's, and Mark saw his neighbors a little differently than he had before. If they decided to stay here, he would be depending on these people, and they him. Mrs. Peterson reported that they had planned the dance for Tuesday night after the meeting was over. She said they had everything they needed except for ice. Jess suggested that everyone bring their ice trays to Mark when they came to get water, and they would fill them and put them in the deep freeze. When the meeting was over, the 4 friends went home, and after the guys had pumped water for the neighbors and put about 100 ice trays in the deep freeze, they pulled out their lists. All 4 were remarkably similar. Sometimes one would have something that the others missed, but for the most part they all had the same items. Once they had the master list complete, they split the list into categories. Each item was placed under food, water, shelter, clothing, security categories. Each item was food, water, shelter, clothing, security, power, or transportation. Everyone liked Mark's idea of prioritizing the items and did it to the new list. They discussed where they could buy the things on it and how much they would cost. When it started getting late, they decided to work on it some more tomorrow. Mark went into his bedroom and put $2 in his black box. Then he and Jess walked to the camper and went to bed.